We continue now at the top of Daf Tesam and Beis and Meseches Makkos. This is Makkos Daf 9b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara quoted the pasuk by Avimelech, where Avimelech said he's righteous, and the Gemara assumed that if there was no response from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then indeed Avimelech was righteous. That would seem to imply that when Avimelech was with Sarah, he was essentially an Omer Mutter. He thought it was Mutter, and Omer Mutter is Anasu. But the Gemara says it's not true. Really, there was a response from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the response was that return the wife of this man because he is a Navi, because he's a prophet, and the Gemara now interprets what that response was. The Gemara says, Eishes Navi hu de Tahader, do you think you only have to return the wife of a prophet? To lav Navi lo Tahader, you don't have to return the wife of someone who's not a prophet? That cannot be the meaning of the pasuk. So what does the pasuk mean? Ela kedamar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, rather it's like Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani said. The Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Yonasan, because Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani says that Rav Yonasan says, Hachi kamar le, this is what he was saying to him. V'ata hashev Eishes ha'ish mikol makom, you have to return this wife of a man. That's in any situation. And the Gemara continues, Udaka in that which you said, Hagoy gam tzadik tarog, are you going to kill somebody who is righteous? Halohu amar li achosihi, didn't he say to me that she was my sister? Meaning again, Avimelech was saying that he's innocent because Avram told him that Sarah was his sister. No, Navihu, Avram is a Navi, he's a prophet, umimchol lamad, he learned from you. Because achsenoi shabol ir aliske achilu shasiya sho alanoso. When somebody comes to a city as a guest, they ask him about eating and drinking. Does he have what to eat? Does he have what to drink? Klum sho'elino. So do they ask him, Ishtechazu, Achoschazu? Do they ask him, is this your wife or is this your sister? Of course not. You were asking these kinds of questions to Avram, and he's a Navi, he's a prophet. He understood what those questions meant. He understood the intent. And so therefore, really, you are not innocent. Just by asking those questions, it was clear what your intent was. And the Gemara concludes, Mikan, from here we see, Sheben Noach Nerag, that a Ben Noach is killed, Shahayalo Lilmod, Velo Lamad, because he should have learned and he did not learn. Again, we see that a Ben Noach, he does receive the death penalty, even in a situation where he claims it was mutter, because we say Hayalo Lilmod, we say he should have learned what was proper. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hasuma Eino Gola, a person who's blind, he does not go to exile. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Meir Omer Gola, Rabbi Meir says that Asuma, he is Gola, he does go to Golas, he goes to exile if he kills by mistake. The Mishnah continues, Hasone Eino Gola, somebody who hates another person, he doesn't go to exile. Rabbi Yossi says, Hasone Nerag, actually somebody who hates another person who kills, he actually is killed, he gets the death penalty. Mimnei Shehu Kamur, because it's like he was already cautioned, he was already warned about this. Rabbi Shimon says, Yesh Sone Gola, V'yesh Sone She'eno Gola. There are some enemies who do go to Golas, and sometimes the enemy, the person who hates, does not go to Golas. Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule. Kol Shu Yochel Omer, anytime where he's able to say Lodas Harag, that he did it Lodas, that he did it with intention, so then Eino Gola, then he doesn't go to exile. V'shelo Lodas Harag, but if it was done without knowledge that he killed, Hareza Gola, then he in fact does go to exile. And Rashi explains, Mimneshu Kamuad, again, Rabbi Yossi says the Sone is killed because he's like a muad, means Kemusra Olav, V'yover al Hasra, it's like he was already warned and he transgressed the warning. Devadei Ladas Hargo, the point is, according to Rabbi Yossi, he certainly killed him with intention, with knowledge. And then we have the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, V'yesh Sone She'eno Gola, there are those who are enemies who do not go to exile, V'lo Nerag, and they're not killed either. And the rule is as follows, Kol Hariga She'yecholin Lomer al Hariga Zu, anytime you have a murder, which we can say about this murder, Shaladas, so that it was done with knowledge, Eino Gola, so he doesn't go to exile, because there's already suspicion that he might have done it on purpose. And Shaloladas Harg, but if it's something where we're going to say that it was Shaloladas, it was without knowledge, Kishahariga Zu Vadai Shaloladas, let's say the way this murder happened, and certainly was not with knowledge, Shein Adam Yochol Lomer Alaladas, so no one can say that it was done with intention, so then Gola, then he will go to exile of a Gemara Mefarish La, and the Gemara will explain this line in the Mishnah. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, below Ra'os, the pasuk says, without seeing. The full pasuk over here, Ovechol Even Asher Yamos Ba, below Ra'os, he kills him with a stone, Vayapel Olav Vayamos V'hulo Oyevlo, and he didn't hate him, V'lo Mevakish Ra'aso, he wasn't seeking bad for him, so it says below Ra'os, and we understand that to mean, Prat L'suma, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that comes to exclude a blind person from Golus. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, below Ra'os, L'Rabos Asasuma, actually below Ra'os, comes to include the blind person. And the Gemara continues and explains, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Because it's written, V'asher yavo esreyehu bayar. It says that he comes upon his friend in the forest. That would mean, afilu suma, that would imply even if he's blind. Asa below ra'os, and so comes below ra'os, and miyate, that becomes an exclusion. We're excluding the blind. Rabbi Meir, below ra'os lemait. Below ra'os is in fact an exclusion of a blind person. And also, though, bivli das, it also says in the pasuk bivli das, without knowledge, that's also lamait. That's also an exclusion. You actually have a double exclusion. Have a miyat achar miyat, that's an exclusion following another exclusion, a double exclusion. V'ein miyot achar miyot ela l'rabos. When you have a miyat achar miyat, if you have a double exclusion, it actually becomes an inclusion. That's the reason of Rabbi Meir. For Rabbi Yehuda, now Rabbi Yehuda will respond to that, bivli das, when it says in the pasuk bivli das, without knowledge, that does not mean to exclude someone who's blind, rather prat lemiskaven, hu da'asa, that comes to exclude with intention. And we will note that prat lemiskaven was mentioned earlier. What that means to say, it excludes a situation where a person intended to kill an animal and he killed a person. In that case, the person actually is excluded from going to Galus. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yossi Omer Hasone Nereg. Rabbi Yossi says that the person who hates the enemy, he's actually killed. And the Gemara says, V'halo Asrube. But the Gemara says, but there was no warning. How do you kill someone if there was no warning? And the Gemara answers to that, Masis and Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Our Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. The Tanya we learned in a Bryce, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, Chaver Eino Tzarech Hasra. Someone who's knowledgeable of the halacha doesn't need a warning. Lafi Shalom Nitno Hasra Ela Lahavchin Ben Shogeg Lemeza. The whole purpose of warning is to be able to distinguish between whether it was by mistake or on purpose. And in the case of a Sone as well, we know it was on purpose, and therefore he is killed. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Yesh Sone Gola V'chulu. There are some cases of a Sone who goes to Golus, and some cases where he does not go to Golus. And the Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Keitzad Omer Rabbi Shimon, Yesh Sone Gola V'yesh Sone She'en Gola. In what cases does Rabbi Shimon say that the enemy goes to Golus? In what cases does he not go to Golus? And the Brisa says, Nifsak, let's say the rope breaks, so then Gola, then he goes to Golus. But Nishma, but let's say it slips from his hand, so then Eino Gola, so then he does not go to Golus. The idea over here is that if it's nifsak, if the rope snaps, so that's clearly a mistake, that's b'shogeg, and he's exiled. But nishmat, let's say he drops it slips out of his hand, that he might have done on purpose, and so therefore he does not go to exile in that case. And the Gemara continues, Vatanya, but we learned in a Bryce. So Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Liolam Eino Gola, he does not go to Golus, Ad Sheishamin Machzalam Miyado, unless the trowel, which is what the builders use, it's a tool that the builders use, until it slips from his hand. There it sounds like that in a situation of Nishmat is actually when he does go to Golus. And so the Gemara says, Kasha Nifsak on Nifsak, Kasha Nishmat on Nishmat. We have a question in terms of snapping, because Rabbi Shimon says he only goes to Golus, Ad Sheishamet, only in a case of Nishmat, sounding like he doesn't go by Nifsak. So it's a contradiction in Nifsak, and it's a contradiction in Nishmat. And the Gemara continues and answers, and Rashi's going to have a different girsa, so we'll see Rashi in a moment, but we'll read it inside. Nifsak on Nifsak lo kasha, Nifsak on Nifsak, snapping is not a question, haba ohev, habisoni. In one case we're talking about somebody who's an ohev, who's a friend. In the other case we're talking about a sone, somebody who's an enemy. The reason why Rashi doesn't have this girsa is because it doesn't really make sense. Nifsak, if it snaps, that's something totally out of control, and in that case we should say it doesn't matter if he's an ohev or a sone. We should say that he's always going to go to Golus in that situation. That's why Rashi has a different girsa. And Nishmat on Nishmat lo kasha, when it slips out of his hand, it's also not difficult. Ha-Rebbe v'ha-Rabbanan, that depends whether we're talking about Rebbe or the Rabbanan. That's referring to the Machlokas Tanoim we had earlier in the Mesechta, when somebody is chopping wood, the pasuk talks about killing by mistake. Is that talking about the blade leaving the handle, or is that talking about the wood that's being chopped, some of that wood that goes flying? That was a Machlokas Rebbe and the Rabbanan. And we'll take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Hachi Garsinan, the proper girsa is as follows: Nishmat on Nishmat lo kasha. Nishmat on Nishmat is not a kasha. Haba oev abisone. So in other words, when it slips from his hand, there we make a distinction between a friend and an enemy. That makes sense, because if it slips from his hand by an enemy, we can assume that it's on purpose. And nifsak on Nifsak lo kasha. Then when it comes to the rope snapping, it's not difficult. Ha-Rebbe v'ha-Rabbanan. In one case it's Rebbe, in one case it's the Rabbanan. Again, when the rope snaps, you're still holding part of the rope. That's kind of similar to when the blade comes off of the axe. So that's why it gets involved with the machlokas between Rebbe and the Rabbanan. And Rashi explains, Hadikatani Nishmat Gola, when it says that Nishmat goes to Golas Bioev, that's talking about somebody who's a friend. The Lo Chashid, the Avin Midas, we don't actually think that he did it on purpose. Udikatani Nishmat Eno Gola, when it says it slips from his hand, he doesn't go to Golas. Besone, that's with an enemy. Kediktani Behedi Bebraisa, like it says explicitly in the Braisa. Yesh Sone Shena Gola, Mefarish Milse Nishmat Eno Gola. Again, by a situation of Nishmat by a Sone, we can assume he did it on purpose. And Nifsak Lo Kasha HaRebi VaRabbanan, when it comes to Nifsak, that's answered by saying one is Rebbe and one is the Rabbanan. Hadekatani nifsak gola afilu besoni. When it says that in nifsak, when the rope snaps, he goes to golas, that's true even by an enemy, because again, it happens certainly by mistake. V'chol shekain bioev, certainly by somebody who's a friend. Rabbanan v'aliv Rabbi Shimon, that's the Rabbanan d'yamar nishmat habarzal mikato v'hara gola. That follows the Rabbanan because they're the ones that said when the blade flies off of the handle, that is the classic case of golas of the pasuk. V'nifsak hachevel dumya the nishmat habarzal mikatohi, and the case of the rope snapping, that's similar. Shenishar ha'eged biyado, because part of the rope is still in his hand and the other part snapped off, so that's similar to that case. V'hadekatani nifsak eno gola. Now, when it says if it snaps, it's not golas, the person doesn't go to golas. Again, that's just a technicality. It's following Rebbe, who says that when the blade comes off the handle, that's not the case of the pasuk. There's no golas there. Rebbe hidamar, that's Rebbe who says nishman habarzal mekato eno gola. That again, if the blade goes off the handle, he doesn't go to golas. Vuadin lechevel hanifsak. And again, that's the same thing. If the rope, if that snaps, it has to be that nothing is left in his hand. Nothing remains in his hand. Dumya demino eitzam isbakeh, which is similar to the wood that's being chopped that goes flying. Rabbi Shimon ein loch sone gola. Now the point that Rashi points out over here, that according to Rabbi Shimon, you actually don't ever have a situation of a sone that's going to go to golas. The reason for that is the one situation where a sone could potentially go to golas is if, let's say, the rope snaps. But the problem is that if the rope snaps, there he's still, some of it remains in his hand. According to Rebbe, that happens to be a case that doesn't go to Golas, according to Rebbe's interpretation of the Psukim. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Lehechon Golan, where exactly do those who are exiled, where do they go to? The answer is Lari Miklat, they go to the cities of refuge. L'shalosh shebe'ever hayarden, there are 3 on the other side of the Yarden. L'shalosh shebe'eretz Canaan, and then there were 3 that were in Eretz Canaan. Shenemar, it says in the Pasuk, is Shalosh ha'arim titnu me'ever l'Yarden, Ves Shalosh ha'arim titnu be'eretz Canaan. It says again 3 cities are on the other side of the Yarden and 3 cities in Eretz Canaan. Ashalo nivchuru shalosh shebe'eretz Yisrael, before they selected the 3 cities in Eretz Yisrael, lo hayu shalosh shebe'ever hayarden koltos. So the ones on the 3 on the other side of the Yarden, they did not provide refuge. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, sheish arei miklat tien. It says there are 6 of them. Ad shiyu sheshton koltos kachas. They all have to provide refuge together for them to be effective. And the Mishnah continues, u'mechuvanos lahen derachim mizu lezu. You have roads that are made with signs one to the other. Shenemar, as it says, tachin l'cha derech v'shilashta. You have to prepare the roads so people can make their way to the Arei Miklat. And the Mishnah continues, Umosrin lahen shnei talmidei chachamim. You give them, those who are fleeing to exile, you give them to accompany them, 2 talmidei chachamim that should accompany them. Shema yargenu b'derech. Maybe he'll kill him on the road. V'yadabru elav, and they'll speak to him. Rabbi Meir says, Hu medaber al yedei atzmo, he speaks himself. Shenemar, as it says, v'zed dvar harotzeach. These are the words of the rotzeach. Rashi explains, Vayidabru elav, they speak to him, means to say, El Goel Hadam. It means to say, the Goel Hadam, who's the relative of the person that was killed, he's coming to kill the Rotseach, he's coming to kill the murderer, so they speak to him, V'yomrin lo, and they say to him, these 2 Talmidei Chachamim, they say to the Goel Hadam, Al tinag bo minag shofchi damim, b'shgaga b'maisi liyado. Don't act like a murderer with this person, he did it by mistake. That's what it means to say that we give him Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, Shema yargenu b'derech, that they're Yidabru elav, that they speak to the Goel Hadam. And then Rabbi Meir is responding, Hu medaber al yedei atzmo, he himself should make his own case, he should state his own case, as it says, V'zed dvar harotzeach. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says, B'tchila, echad shogeg v'echad mezin makdimin li'ari miklat. In the beginning, whether a person kills b'shogeg, whether he kills by mistake, or whether he kills b'mezin on purpose, he should flee to the Ari Miklat, he should flee to the cities of refuge. Ubezin sholchin movino somisham. Then what happens is Bezin sends agents and they bring him out of the Ir Miklat, and they have to try the case. And Mishan ischai misa bebezin hargu. If somebody is liable to the death penalty in court, then they kill him. Mishalon ischai misa. And if he's not liable to the death penalty, patru, so then they exempt him. Mishan is chayiv golus machzir no solam makomo. And somebody who's liable to go to golus, they return him to golus, to exile. Shenemers, it says, ve'shivu also edol ir mekloto. They return him to the city, to his city of refuge. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Shalosh arim hivdil Moshe be'ever hayarden. Moshe Rabbeinu set aside 3 cities on the other side of the Yarden as Ari Miklat, to Chenegdon hivdil Yoshua Yehoshua be'eretz Canaan, and corresponding to them, Yehoshua separated cities in Eretz Canaan. Umchuvanos hayu kamin shtei shuros shebekerem, and they are lined up like two rows in the vineyard. Chevron beYehuda keneged Batzer b'Midbar. Chevron in Yehuda, that corresponds to Betzer b'Midbar. Shechem b'Har Ephraim keneged Ramos b'Gilad. Shechem and Har Ephraim, that is opposite Ramos b'Gilad. And Kadesh b'Har Naphtali keneged Golan b'Bashan. Kadesh and Har Naphtali is opposite Golan b'Bashan. Ushlosh v'Shilashta, and then the pasuk says v'Shilashta. What does that mean? Sheyehum mishulash, and it means they should be evenly divided, evenly dispersed geographically in the land. What that means is Sheyehei midarim lechevron k'mei Chevron l'Shechem. The distance from the southern part of Eretz Canaan to Chevron should be the same distance as Chevron to Shechem. Umei Chevron l'Shechem k'mei Shechem l'Kadesh. From Chevron to Shechem should be the same distance as Shechem to Kadesh. Umei Shechem l'Kadesh k'mei Kadesh l'Tzafon, and from Shechem to Kadesh should be the same as from Kadesh to the north. And be'ever hayarden tlos be'eretz Yisrael tlos. The Gemara now asks a question. And in Ever hayarden, on the other side of the Yarden, there are three cities, and in Eretz Yisrael there are three cities. That's difficult, as Rashi explains. Be'ever hayarden tlos bitmiya. This is a wonder. Benachal ashnei shvatim shalosh kemo benachal asar shvatim. In an area with only 2 shvatim, you have 3 cities, just like in an area with 10 shvatim. That doesn't make sense. And the Gemara continues and answers. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Begilad shchichi rotzchim, because in Gilad, which is in Ever hayarden, there were a lot of murderers, and therefore, since there were a lot of murderers, there was a need for more Arei Miklat, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Aleph.